Sorry, Jimmy. I'm just.
Just cutting through?
No. No.
Oh, you're not cutting.
He had the world in the palm of his hand, the Oscar, the legacy, the headlines that called him untouchable. At 42, Leonardo DiCaprio was more than just a star. He was a myth, wrapped in money, mystery, and magnificence. Women adored him. Directors fought for him. The Academy had finally bowed to him. But what if the man who conquered Hollywood was slowly being consumed by it? While the world cheered for the golden boy, few noticed the storm tightening behind his eyes. It wasn't scandal, it wasn't drugs, it wasn't failure. It was something far more dangerous, the silent erosion of meaning behind success. He was surrounded by fame, yet suffocated by it. Worshipped by millions, but unable to let one soul get close enough to see the real man inside. And on a quiet night, when the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, Leo looked into the mirror and whispered something no one expected from the king of the world. "I don't know who I am when no one's watching. 10. This isn't a story about glamour, it's about the cost of perfection, the haunting truth of what fame can never save, and the unraveling of a man who had it all except peace. Long before the yachts, the Oscars, and the million-dollar smiles, Leonardo DiCaprio was just a skinny kid growing up in the most forgotten corners of Los Angeles. Not Beverly Hills, not Malibu, but East Hollywood, a neighborhood overrun by drugs, crime, and desperation. The glitz of the entertainment capital was just blocks away, yet it may as well have been another planet. He was born in 1974 to Ermelyn, a legal secretary, and George, a comic book artist. But before he could even form full sentences, his world was already unraveling. His parents divorced when he was barely a year old. Most toddlers cry over broken toys. Leo cried over a broken home. They tried to co-parent. They remained friends. But nothing could erase the reality. Leonardo was being raised by a single mother in a neighborhood where used needles lined the sidewalks and gunshots rang louder than lullabies. At night, Ermelyn would hold her son tight and pretend the sirens outside were just part of a movie. Leo once said, "I got robbed a few times. I saw people smoking crack and shooting heroin. It was insane." For a child, that wasn't a statistic. That was breakfast on the way to school. There were no gates, no bodyguards, no trust funds, just a rented apartment filled with hope and a mother working overtime just to keep the lights on. She took him to auditions between shifts, pushed him to believe in dreams that had no blueprint, but dreams couldn't protect him from reality. At school, he was the outcast, too energetic, too weird, too poor. Teachers labeled him a disruption. Classmates mocked his clothes. He never fit in. Not because he didn't try, but because he never learned how to pretend everything was okay. He would stare at the television screen, mesmerized by actors who seemed untouchable, clean, loved, and somewhere deep inside, a fire lit. Not for fame, not yet, but for escape. At 5 years old, he was already auditioning. By 10, he had faced more rejection than most adults endure in a lifetime. Directors told him he was too raw, too intense, too wild in the eyes. But what they didn't understand was those weren't acting choices. That was Leo, a boy raised in chaos, trying to make sense of it by becoming someone else. He would later say, "Acting was the only place where I could feel safe being someone else. Anywhere else, I was just a kid, waiting to be crushed." And perhaps that's the tragedy no one saw coming. The actor the world would come to worship wasn't built in privilege. He was built in pain. Every role, every award, every moment of perfection, all traced back to a childhood spent hiding from the sound of violence just outside his bedroom window. His mother was his rock, but even rocks crack under pressure. There were nights when they didn't know if rent would be paid, days when casting directors didn't even let him finish his lines. And still, Ermelyn held his hand and said, "You are meant for something bigger." And Leo, that awkward, angry, fragile boy, believed her. Because he had to. Because without that belief, he might have become just another name lost in a police report or a rehab file. He didn't escape poverty through luck. He clawed his way out with raw talent, relentless hunger, and a haunting kind of silence that still echoes in his eyes. It was in that broken neighborhood, inside that fractured childhood, where Leonardo DiCaprio stopped being a child and started becoming a survivor. His rise wasn't meteoric, it was messy, uncertain, and riddled with rejection. Leonardo DiCaprio entered the world of acting the way most kids enter trouble headfirst, wide-eyed, and completely unprepared for what awaited. The industry didn't roll out a red carpet for him. It slammed doors, again and again. He didn't come from a dynasty. He had no famous last name, just a boy with piercing blue eyes and a desperation he couldn't hide. He started with commercials, bubblegum, cereal, educational videos, audition after audition. He stood in rooms where people judged his worth in under 10 seconds. He smiled too much. Then, too little. He was too intense for daytime television, too fragile for sitcoms. One agent told him flat out, "Your name sounds too foreign. You should change it to Lenny Williams." He refused. Because even as a teenager, Leo knew the moment you start pretending to be someone else off-screen, you lose yourself forever. But it took its toll. He lost roles, then lost hope. He landed a part, then it got cut. He got a callback, then got ghosted. And just when he thought he might finally get a break, they gave the role to a safer choice. Again, he was a child actor without a stage, a rising star without light. And the world wasn't watching, not yet. His saving grace came in the form of one moment, one audition. This Boy's Life, 1993. A gritty, unforgiving drama opposite Robert De Niro, a living legend. Leo was 18, untrained, unknown, and burning, with something casting directors couldn't define. At the final callback, De Niro tested him personally. He threw real punches in the scene, challenged him, cornered him. Leo didn't flinch. He fought back. Not just as the character, but as a kid who'd been fighting his whole life. He got the role, and from that moment, something shifted. Critics called him electric, raw, uncontainable, but with praise came pressure. Just 1 year later, he played Arnie Grape, a mentally disabled teen in What's Eating Gilbert Grape. It was a role that could have ruined him. Instead, it earned him his first Oscar nomination. He was 19. The world started to take notice, but Leo? He still felt like an imposter. Fame began whispering in his ear, but it didn't comfort him, it terrified him. Because deep down, he still felt like the poor kid from East Hollywood waiting to be kicked out. He turned down blockbuster roles. He avoided teen idol fame like it was a virus. He chose pain over popularity, and yet somehow he ended up with both. And then the ship came. Then came the ship, Titanic. It wasn't just a film, it was a phenomenon, a tidal wave that swallowed the world whole, and at the center of it stood a two-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio. Overnight, he became the most recognizable face on the planet. Teen magazines printed his photos on every page. Girls screamed his name. The box office shattered records. He wasn't just famous. He was worshipped. Jack Dawson became an immortal symbol of youth, love, and sacrifice. But Leo? He became a prisoner in his own face. He hated it. Fame, to most, is a dream. To him, it was a nightmare. He stopped giving interviews. He ran from red carpets. He took back entrances, wore baseball caps low, ducked in shadows. In public, he smiled like a star. In private, he was unraveling. Because Leonardo DiCaprio didn't want to be a heartthrob, he wanted to be a serious actor. But no one wanted to see his pain. They wanted Jack, over and over and over again. So, he rebelled. He turned down the sequels, refused romantic leads. He dove into darkness, the beach, gangs of New York, The Aviator, blood, diamond films that demanded blood, sweat, and the kind of obsession that corrodes the soul. He worked with Scorsese like a man possessed, chasing roles that were raw, broken, complicated, anything but beautiful. And the critics? They weren't kind. They said he was trying too hard, said he'd peaked too young, said the pretty boy couldn't act. So he pushed harder. More weight lost. More isolation. More nights alone on set, bleeding into characters that never smiled. He was nominated for Oscars and lost, again and again and again. And every time he walked out of that theater without a golden statue, something inside him dimmed. Because for Leo, it was never about the trophy. It was about proving that he deserved to be seen as more than a face. He partied, yes, he dated supermodels, flew private, laughed in yachts. The media made him a symbol of excess, but none of them saw what happened when the party ended. Behind closed doors, he confessed to friends, "I don't know how to live a normal life anymore." He had everything: money, legacy, power. But still, something gnawed at him. In photos, he was surrounded. But in real life, he was always alone. He once said, "You can have everything and still feel empty." I know, because I have. At 42, Leonardo DiCaprio was one of the most accomplished actors in history. But he wasn't at peace. He was exhausted, haunted, and for the first time in his life, beginning to ask a terrifying question. What if I've built an empire on a version of myself that was never real? He had it all except peace. At 42, Leonardo DiCaprio stood on a mountaintop built from gold statues and box office billions. But when he looked down, he saw no one standing beside him. That was the real tragedy. Not the losses at award shows, not the brutal roles, but the quiet revelation that he had no idea who Leonardo was without the camera rolling. Behind every character he embodied, from Howard Hughes to Jordan Belfort, he had slowly lost pieces of himself. His relationships never lasted. Not because he didn't want love, but because he didn't know how to hold it without breaking it. He once said in an interview, "I don't believe anyone can love me for me anymore. They love the idea of me." He had grown suspicious, not just of Hollywood, but of intimacy. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every dinner came with camera flashes. Even the people who claimed to love him always wanted something in return: a name, a headline, a piece of the myth. And then came the panic attacks. In the middle of filming The Revenant, isolated in freezing forests, eating raw bison liver and sleeping inside animal carcasses for authenticity, something inside him snapped. He didn't cry out, he didn't collapse, but he broke in silence. He began questioning everything. Why was he still pushing himself like this? Why couldn't he feel anything when millions cheered? Why, after finally winning the Oscar, did he feel emptier than ever? He had chased excellence for so long, he had forgotten to chase meaning. At night, he'd sit alone in luxury suites, surrounded by trophies, scrolling through old interviews where younger versions of himself said things like, "I just want to be taken seriously." Now he was taken seriously, and it felt like a joke. And worse, he feared that the only version of Leo the world wanted was the one he couldn't play anymore. One night, during a quiet birthday celebration, he told a friend, "I spent my entire life running towards the spotlight. Now I realize it blinded me." That was the moment. Not a scandal, not a public meltdown. Just a quiet, crushing awareness that he had climbed the ladder of success, only to find it leaning against the wrong wall. He didn't announce a comeback, because he didn't leave. But something in Leonardo DiCaprio changed not on camera, but within. After The Revenant, after the Oscar, after the silence, he stepped back. Not from the craft, but from the noise. He stopped chasing roles that demanded blood. He stopped explaining himself. He stopped apologizing for needing space. Instead, he started listening to the world, to the planet, and maybe, for the first time in years, to his own voice. He poured himself into environmental work, not as a celebrity ambassador, but as a man on a mission. He met with scientists, activists, indigenous leaders. He didn't just donate millions, he gave his name, his platform, and his time. He stood before the United Nations and said, "Climate change is not hysteria, it is a fact." And for once, the world didn't see a movie star. They saw a man fighting for something real. But even in this noble crusade, Leo kept his guard up. He rarely did interviews. He rarely smiled in public. He protected his inner world like a sacred flame, small, flickering, but alive. His relationships became more private, his appearances more selective. He wasn't hiding, he was healing. When asked why he never settled down, never married, he responded simply, "Some people find peace in permanence. I found mine in movement." He traveled, disconnected, listened. And somewhere between the ice caps of Greenland and the coral reefs of Indonesia, Leonardo found what Hollywood could never give him: stillness. And in stillness, truth. He began choosing roles not for prestige, but for meaning. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood wasn't just a film, it was a quiet love letter to the era that shaped him. Don't Look Up wasn't just satire, it was his cry for the world to wake up. And behind the scenes he mentored younger actors, shared space, gave guidance. The boy who once felt alone in every casting room was now making sure others never felt that way again. He didn't need to be the loudest voice anymore, because now his silence had weight. They still call him the Golden Boy. Still chase him down red carpets. Still whisper about who he's dating, what he's wearing, where he's going next. But Leonardo DiCaprio no longer runs toward the spotlight. He walks beside it carefully, quietly, on his own terms. And maybe that's the real evolution. Not from actor to icon, but from icon to human. He's no longer trying to prove he belongs. He's no longer burning to be understood. He's simply existing fully, flawed, awake. Because the truth is, fame couldn't save him. It never does. But what it couldn't destroy was the boy who survived the fire and came back not as a god, but as a man willing to feel again. So, the next time you see him on screen, don't just watch the performance. Watch the eyes, the weight behind them, the years, the pain, the peace. And ask yourself, do we admire people for who they are? Or for the myth we've made of them? Because somewhere beneath the tuxedos, the yachts, the Oscar speeches, there's still a kid from East Hollywood. Still searching. Still standing. Still wondering if he's finally enough, even without the applause. If this journey stirred something in you, a memory, a mirror, a moment, leave a note. Not just for Leo, but for anyone out there trying to find peace in a world that demands perfection.